everybody, it's Naya. Welcome back to Naya Reason Smile. Ha 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 ha! We made it, you guys! We made it! We made it. 2019 is less than a month away. We made it. Today I'm going to be talking about all of the amazing books that I read this year, and you guys, it was a struggle narrowing this list down to like 10 books. I think I technically have 11, and I'm going to give a few honorable mentions here and there. Yeah, I spent all night compiling this list in my little journal here of my favorite books of 2018. It's a little difficult, I'm not gonna lie, not just choosing the books, but also I did not keep track of anything I read this year. I don't really use Goodreads. I already had about 5 books that I knew I wanted to mention on this list, but I went back and did research on myself. I went back and double checked all of my wrap-up videos from this year just to make sure that I got all of the books and I didn't skip any. Overall, 2018 was such a good reading year for me. I discovered so many authors and I read so many amazing books. But without further ado, let us get into this video. I don't know why I feel so sad. These are my favorite books of 2018, the books that just, they hit me, man. They hit me in the feels. Book number 1 for me is A Darker Shade of Magic by Victoria Schwab. This year, if I could pick one author to define this reading year for me, it would probably be Victoria Schwab, because I discovered her this year and my life was never the same. I will be mentioning another Victoria Schwab book later on this list, but I'm gonna go in chronological order from January to December. A Darker Shade of Magic. Oh, I think I made, when I did a wrap-up video, like a little skit on how hard this book is to describe, because it is literally just one of those fantasy books where it's like, you can't describe it in an elevator. Do you know what I mean? Like if you meet someone in an elevator and you have 30 seconds and they're like, what's this book? What is it about? And you're just like, magic? In summary, is a dark fantasy book about this guy who can travel between different parallel worlds, specifically different parallel Londons. There are 4 different Londons in this book and each of them are very different. One's very mundane. There's also a red London that has magic and a white London and a black London. When I read this for the first time, it was such a unique experience because I had never read a fantasy world like this before. I read a lot of fantasy books and I also read a lot of sci-fi, and so in a lot of sci-fi books, one of the sort of main topics or something that's written about a lot is sort of parallel worlds, different dimensions. Someone will make some scientific discovery that allows them to travel between worlds, and so that's very much a sci-fi concept, I think. And then we also have, of course, magic, which is a fantasy concept. So when I read this book, the first thing that really stood out to me was that it took that concept of traveling between worlds, right, or traveling between different dimensions, which is very sci-fi, and it combined it with this sort of fantasy magic, dark magic that I love to read about in fantasy books. And on top of that, Victoria Schwab gave us amazing characters, very dark kind of gray characters that aren't really good, aren't really bad. That's very much a theme of Victoria Schwab. Put that all together and you create a book that I fall in love with. Book number 2 is Top 10 by Katie Cotugno. Yes, I have for once a contemporary book on this list. I think I actually have 2 contemporary books. Oh my god, this book was so cute. Much as I love romance, I don't usually like when it's the main plot of a novel. I like when it's like a fantasy world and then there's romance. You know, I like to read romance as the icing on the cake, which makes it kind of hard for me to really love a contemporary book if the only thing the plot's about is romance. You know what I mean? But Katie Cotugno wedged her way into my ice-cold fantasy heart. This book follows 2 best friends, Gabby and Ryan. Now, Gabby is very shy. She kind of keeps to herself, whereas Ryan is very outgoing. You know, he plays hockey, he loves to socialize, do all the things, and they're very different personality-wise, but despite their differences, they became best friends, and now that they're approaching senior year, you know, their life's really about to change, and on top of that, their sort of friendship is kind of turning more into a romance. They're both trying to figure out how they feel about each other. Like most friends, they kind of have like a little thing that they do, and so for these 2 friends, they have this thing they call Top 10. Would do this thing where they would create a top 10 list, so they'd be like, top 10 moments of this, top 10 moments of this, and because they're graduating, they decide to do a top 10 moments of their friendship. It is just so adorable, oh my god. The dialogue in this book was hilarious and heartwarming and just so real. I think friendship is such an underrated thing in books. I love to read about a good friendship, especially a friendship that's maybe bordering on something more. Not only because of the relationship between our two main characters, but also the family aspect was a big part of this book as well. Our main character, she has pretty bad anxiety, and I felt like that was so well represented in this book. And Gabby is also bisexual. I'm not sure if I mentioned that in my wrap-up video. It was a very heartwarming book, and I don't know why. It just wedged its way into my heart, and very few contemporary books do that, so I am putting it on this list for that reason. All right, book number 3. I have been waiting. I was gonna say this book first, but I'm like, no, Naya, go in chronological order. 2018 was the year of Vicious. This book out of this whole list is the book that is like, if I had to choose one book of my favorite book of 2018, it would be this book right here, Vicious by Victoria Schwab. Oh my god, I've talked about this book so much. I have made a video dedicated to Victoria Schwab, so I'll link it up here if you want to check it out. So Victor and Eli were college roommates and they were best friends. They did everything together. Eli decided that he wanted to do his final senior thesis on EOs, or extraordinary people. So people who have been in accidents, who've had near-death experiences, that survived and came back with some sort of supernatural power. I know it sounds like a sort of played out storyline, but Victoria Schwab wrote it in a way that was so unique. Fast forward, both the main characters, Eli and Victor, they end up going to extremes to try and prove that extraordinary people exist, and they end up doing experiments that lead to some of them getting powers. Fast forward down the timeline, now they're adults and they are trying to kill each other. This book, in Victoria Schwab's own words, is about characters trying to gain control and what happens when the moral and ethical lines just kind of get totally washed away, and really what happens when real people get powers. Because, you know, in the movies, you know, superheroes, they get powers and immediately they want to do good, and some people, they get powers and immediately they want to do evil. In reality, if people actually got powers, you know, no one's really entirely good or evil, and so we're following these two characters that aren't really heroes or villains. They're kind of just in between, in that gray area, and it's just such a fascinating book. I loved it. I got a tattoo because of it. It was just the next 2 books on my list are actually poetry collections. You guys could probably already guess which poetry collections these are because I can't stop talking about them because I love them so much. The Princess Saves Herself in this one, and The Witch Doesn't Burn in this one by Amanda Lovelace. These poetry collections were amazing. I cried several times reading The Princess Saves Herself in this one so much because a lot of the poems just like really hit home. I highly recommend it because I think a lot of people can relate to at least one of the many poems in this book. Specifically, all the women out there. It was just an incredible book, and I was able to scarily relate to so much of it. This one's more focused on women, things that women have to deal with on a day-to-day basis in life, and she writes about it in such a real, direct way, and that's what I love about both of her poems, is she's so blunt. You get this sort of knife's edge feeling, I always say. Here's what it is. This is the truth. Okay, the next book on this list is actually an arc, and I can't believe it isn't out yet because for some reason I thought it came out already, but Shauna McGuire always releases, or her publicists always send out arcs super early, like 6 months early. This book doesn't come out until January, but I'm still putting it on this list, even though it didn't even come out this year, because it was so good. This is the 4th book in the Wayward Children series. The first book is Every Heart a Doorway, and then Down Among the Sticks and Bones, Beneath the Sugar Sky, and now In an Absent Dream. This entire series is about these children that come back from other worlds. These children who doorways opened up for them when they were in a time of a lot of stress or a lot of need. So they walked through those doorways and lived in another world, a world that fit them better. But then for some reason, they were either brought back or kicked out of those worlds and brought back into the real world, and then have to learn how to live in reality. So every book in the series follows a different character at the Wayward Children School, and we get a little bit of a backstory as to, you know, what happened, what led them to, you know, going through this door into another world, and what was that world like. That's what I love about this series so much, is that the characters in each of the books are so different personality-wise, and so the world that they came from like fits their personality, if that makes any sense. So this character in particular came from a very like perfect cookie cutter family, and so the world that she goes into is sort of, I don't want to spoil what kind of world she goes into, but it's fascinating. And the character in this book, I didn't even make the connection until the very end, but is a character in the first book. This was sort of an expansion as to how she ended up at that school and how she ended up getting kicked out of her world, and it's just, it was so good. Okay, we're getting into the darker books now. The next book on my list is A History of Wolves by Emily Fridlin. Now, I read this book during the booktubeathon, I believe, and I was so pleasantly disturbed and surprised by this book. This book is a gothic coming of age story, and it is very dark, just it's dark, okay? We're following this character throughout her life from the ages of, I think, like 8 years old all the way into her adulthood, and the order of this book is not chronological. Something happened in this character's childhood. Actually, a lot of things happened, but one event specifically happened in her childhood that is still affecting her into adulthood. Every chapter jumps to a different point in her life, and you slowly, as you read it, start to piece things together, and the more you piece things together, the more disturbing the story gets. From the beginning, the character who we're following, she seems really off, and that's something that intrigued me. Was a big part of why I kept reading, was because I didn't know if she was like the victim in the story or the culprit or the like who she was, and I didn't know who she was at all. This book is incredibly atmospheric. It's extremely dark. There's this, I don't want to say suspense because that doesn't feel like the right word. There's this tension throughout the whole book. I hope I'm describing this book well. There's not much I can say without spoiling it, because when you finish the book and, you know, look back, it seems like a very simple plot, but the way it's written and the way the author just keeps you in this very tense state while reading it just makes it such a good book, so I highly recommend. Okay, on to a lighter rom-com. The next book I have here is The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. This book, I can't even tell you the last book I read before this one where I literally laughed out loud every single chapter because it was so funny and witty and just fresh. This book is a rom-com in book form. I could totally picture Ryan Gosling as like the main guy character in this book, because like the way he does that smirk thing, you know, that like I'm laughing and I'm thinking of something really funny, but I'm not gonna tell you what it is. Basically following two coworkers, a guy and a girl. They sit right across from each other. They have this love-hate relationship thing going on. They sort of just mess with each other and are constantly picking on each other. They're both working at a publishing company that was originally two different publishing companies, and they were both like the head assistants until those two publishing companies merged. Very different people. Our main female character, she's very dorky. She collects Smurfs. She's just so quirky and funny. The thing I love the most about this book was the humor. The humor in this book, I think I described it as being extremely petty, and it definitely is. So if you're someone who doesn't like petty humor, you probably won't like this book. But if you're someone who just loves like those really insulting, funny jokes, yeah, this is the book for you. The plot really isn't anything extreme, but the characters and the humor and the dialogue is the reason why this book is on my favorites list, and I hope they make a movie out of this book too. Sally Thorne, I love you. Okay, the next book on my list is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. I know this book is on a lot of people's favorites list for this year, and honestly, personally, I think it was worth the hype. I read Holly Black for the first time this year, and I realized why so many people love her, and it's because she is literally, she has a PhD. I don't know if she actually has one, but based off what I've read, it's like she has a PhD in the world of fairies. Like her knowledge base of just how many different sort of fairy stories that she's taken and then written her own books about is incredible. Before I read this book, I read The Darkest Part of the Forest, which was the book she wrote before this one. Characters in that book do make an appearance in this book, but you don't have to have read that book to read this book, if that makes sense. So this book follows two main characters, two sisters. Specifically, we're following one of the sisters, Jude. Their parents get murdered by fairies, and they are taken by the person who murdered her parents and have to live and grow up and survive in fairyland. The main sister we're following, Jude, she's very smart, very cunning, and she has just done an excellent job at surviving over the years. This book is following them living in fairyland and having to navigate sort of the royal court and just the whole world, really. In this fairy world, humans are seen as like dogs, like absolutely nothing, like the worst of the worst. So they really have to be smart in order to not die. This book was surprisingly dark, which I love, because I think fairies, or the whole lore and myth around fairies, can sometimes be really like happy and like cheery, but in reality it's like, no, they're dark, you know, scary creatures, and I love that Holly Black writes them that way. Holly Black wrote the Spiderwick Chronicles, which I absolutely loved in the movies growing up. The reason why I loved it was because, again, she wrote about fairies and trolls and little creatures and stuff as being these really dark creatures, and it was kind of like, you know, like horror-y a little bit. It was wonderful, and I cannot wait for The Wicked King to come out next year. Okay, and the last 3 books, the last series, can you guys guess what it is? I read it recently, I haven't stopped talking about it, I cried about it, I had a full body experience. The last book series on this list that I listened to the entire audiobook trilogy in a week, and I cried and I died. Chaos Walking series by Patrick Ness. Oh my god, I have talked about it so much this year. Oh my god, this book series, and it's being turned into a movie with Tom Holland, and I'm so excited because it is literally my most highly anticipated movie for 2019. The Chaos Walking series, so the first book in the series is The Knife of Never Letting Go, and we're basically following Todd Hewitt, who is the main character. He's 13, about to be 14 in the book, so he's about to become a man in his world. Going into this book, I did not know it was a science fiction series. I just thought it was sort of post-apocalypse, and so I thought it took place on Earth. I quickly realized that was not the case. This is not a spoiler, by the way. You realize this very quickly into the book. In this world, everyone has, all the men have this thing called the noise, which is basically like their thoughts and everything they're thinking, other people can read. So everyone can read everyone's thoughts, at least with the men, not the women. There's only men in his town, which is another thing that's really weird and mysterious when you first go into the book. That's all I want to tell you about the book series. It does not do it justice because the book and the world expands so much as you read the series, but that is the main plot going into it, and it is science fiction. It is just fantastic, and above everything, despite it being a science fiction book, the arc of the characters, of who our main character Todd is and this other character who you will meet and becomes a huge part of the book, the arc from the first book to the last book is incredible. It's kind of like a sci-fi coming of age story, if that's like a genre, I don't know. But it was fantastic. The #1 book on my sci-fi favorites list, also fantastic, and I highly recommend you listen to the series in audiobook form, because there are sound effects and just the experience will be enhanced. So please listen to the book in audiobook form. But anyways, that is all my favorites for 2018, and I am just it was a good reading, you guys. Please let me know what your guys' favorite books were from this year, if you read good books, hopefully. Until next time, keep reading, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.